On 5 News, the illegal schools putting children at risk of harm. We reveal there are more than 150 across England with no proper checks on what they're doing.
When Ofsted inspectors arrived here, they found squalid conditions. Children had no access to running water in the toilets, and in one room they found 3 single mattresses covered in filthy sheets.
One former pupil of an unregistered school told us physical abuse happened day in, day out. Also, Hillary Clinton comes out fighting as Donald Trump says he's on the cusp of something incredible. His rival talks tough.
I am sick and tired of the negative, dark, divisive, dangerous vision and behavior of people who support Donald Trump.
The human cost of cuts to care, how thousands of people with disabilities are left without the help they need.
At the rate they're cutting, it's always the most vulnerable that they cut, which are these sort of people that cannot stand up for themselves.
And honouring the members of the Guinea Pig Club, the World War II servicemen who had pioneering treatment for their injuries. Hello and welcome to 5 News. I'm Sian Williams. Thousands of children are going to schools where teachers ignore rules on what should and shouldn't be taught, where laws on safety, hygiene and discipline are routinely ignored, and where the inspectors never visit. Now, a 5 News investigation can reveal that authorities fear there are at least 150 illegal schools in England. They say the problem is far bigger than previously thought, and they warn those children are at serious risk of harm. Layla Hayes has this special report.
They are schools that are hidden from local authorities, from inspectors, even from the government. Illegal, unregistered schools where children become invisible and are at risk of abuse and indoctrination. The education watchdog Ofsted say around a third are faith schools, either Jewish, Christian or Islamic. Daniel, who's asked to keep his identity hidden, went to an unregistered, ultra-Orthodox Jewish school where education was minimal.
It would just be back-to-back classes all day of Hebrew texts. There was perhaps an hour a day set aside for combined studies such as English and maths. Very, very, very basic. And these weren't taught by qualified teachers. They were taught by people who could barely speak English themselves. There was physical abuse, corporal punishment, caning, children who get their noses broken or fingers broken, children who were forced to wash their mouth out with soap. And this was routine. It happened day in, day out.
In the last year, the Chief Inspector of Ofsted has written a number of letters to the Department for Education warning of the danger of illegal schools which aren't registered with local authorities. In May, they identified more than 100 suspected unregistered schools across the country. Ofsted have now told 5 News that number has increased to more than 150. They say there are many more children hidden away than previously thought, and that too many children remain at significant risk of harm. This school in Birmingham, the unregistered Bawdsley Independent School, was closed down last year after Ofsted notified police that children were at risk.
When Ofsted inspectors arrived here, they found squalid conditions. Children had no access to running water in the toilets, and in one room they found 3 single mattresses covered in filthy sheets. There was also clear evidence of segregation, with different classrooms for boys and girls. And there was no evidence that staff here had been properly checked to see whether they could work with children.
While it's legal to remove a child from school to be home educated, Ofsted say many of those operating unregistered schools are using those freedoms as a cover for their activities. In a statement, the Department for Education said, "We have given Ofsted additional resources to root out unregistered schools and take action through the courts. Where children are being put at risk or not receiving a suitable education, local authorities and the police have clear powers to intervene." But Labour's Shadow Education Secretary said the government has been too slow to act.
Well, I think the government's response to unregistered schools is woeful. It's an abdication of responsibility. We know that there's a real problem there and that many children are being failed by the state by not intervening and doing their job, which is oversight and regulation. The Minister and the Secretary of State have been asked to take action on this, and I appeal to them today to do their job and take action.
Daniel worries children are still at risk.
Do you think the government is doing enough to tackle this issue?
No, clearly not. There are thousands and thousands of children who are being educated in the same way, or shall I say not educated in the same way that I was, and yet nothing is being done.
How does that make you feel?
I feel livid. I think it's one of the great injustices of modern Britain.
Ofsted say unregistered schools are a serious and growing threat to children. And former pupils like Daniel say more needs to be done to make sure their voices are heard.
Layla's here now. This is truly shocking, Layla. Do we know how many children are affected?
Well, last year, Ofsted discovered 15 unregistered schools. In those schools alone, they identified more than 800 pupils. They now say there are more than 150 unregistered schools across the country. So we could be talking about thousands of children. And they say this is a moving picture. They say new cases are coming to their attention every single week. In Birmingham, where I went, they have closed 7 illegal schools in the last year alone. And yet nobody has ever been prosecuted for operating an unregistered school. Ofsted say that has to change, and they're very clear on this. They say all schools need to be registered or closed down.
Layla, thank you. A year ago, some said it was unthinkable, but this time next week, Donald Trump could be the next president of the United States. The gap in the polls has narrowed again. It's now less than 2%. So, as America decides, both he and Hillary Clinton are fighting hard. He's boasted of being close to achieving something incredible, while she has condemned the dark and divisive nature of his campaign. Julian Drucker has been visiting the key battleground states, and he sent us this report.
The possibility that this is the next president of the USA appears to be growing. So on the campaign trail in Wisconsin, Donald Trump was daring to dream.
We're on the cusp of something incredible. Historic change that transfers power from a failed political establishment and returns that power to our families, communities, and citizens.
Unusually, it was Hillary Clinton expressing rage as a heckler in Florida called her husband a rapist.
I am sick and tired of the negative, dark, divisive, dangerous vision and behavior of people who support Donald Trump.
In Ohio, the first black president made the case for the first female one.
Reject cynicism, reject fear, reject meanness. Choose hope. Choose hope. Choose hope.
But history can't happen without a crucial part of the electorate. Little Rock Church in Charlotte, North Carolina is a place of prayer and an election battleground. African Americans have always overwhelmingly voted for the Democrats. But early indications suggest Clinton doesn't yet have the pulling power of Obama in getting people to actually vote. It means alongside the religious messages, an electoral one.
Please vote. This is the most important election of our lifetime. Amen.
According to the pastor here, the possibility of a Trump presidency should fill America's black voters with dread.
We fear who may be elected because of the fact that some of the strides that have been made in the past, some of the accomplishments that have been made in the past will be just erased when certain people are in office.
So being the voters who could keep Donald Trump from the White House weighs heavily on these worshippers.
Every vote counts this time.
And more than ever, you think
more
this time?
than ever, this is a very crucial election.
It means that it's more incumbent upon us, all of us, to energize the rest of the community, and there's no time for complacency.
For more than a week already, people have been able to vote early at ballot stations like this one. It's a more convenient option, which has traditionally been more popular with black voters than white.
But a trend shows even this is in decline with African Americans compared to the last election. Pensioner William Coles, who had just cast his vote, said a big push to attract black voters may have started too late.
It's been a great effort. They need to continue and do it more. should have done it much earlier than just recently starting.
Here we go, Jesus, Jesus.
With less than a week to go now, every vote, every person matters like never before.
And Julian is now in Ohio. That, of course, another state that could be decisive in this race. Julian, tell us why Ohio is so important.
Sian, Ohio is a real barometer of where this election is going, and the latest polls show it is virtually tied here. That's why Barack Obama has spoken here so often. In the last few hours, he's admitted there are problems. The black vote is not as solid as it should be, he said. He also commented on the inquiry into Hillary Clinton's emails for the first time. He seemed to rebuke the FBI by saying that public opinion should not be formed by the innuendo of investigations. But trust is a huge issue here. And in one poll asking voters which is the more trustworthy, honest candidate, Donald Trump leads Hillary Clinton by 8 points.
Julian, thank you. Here, a father has been convicted of murdering his newborn baby by shaking him to death. Daniel Sanzoni killed his 13-day-old son in Wolverhampton in October last year. Medical experts say the injuries Sanzoni inflicted were some of the worst they'd ever seen. An investigation has been launched into the death of an RAF serviceman at a training facility in the Scottish Highlands. The man died during an exercise at RAF Tain, that's near Inverness, yesterday afternoon. His family have been informed there are no other casualties. And hundreds of unaccompanied minors who've remained in Calais despite the clearing of the migrant camps are now being taken to asylum centres. Buses began to collect some of the youngsters, most of them teenagers, this morning. Charities say they had been sleeping rough as the camps were torn down around them. 2 children and a man have been found dead at a house in Leicestershire, where police had been called to reports of a disturbance. A woman who was also in the house is being treated for her injuries in hospital. Well, let's talk to Peter Lane, who joins us from the scene in Hinckley now. What can you tell us, Peter?
Well, Sian, the house is sealed off. It is, of course, a crime scene. Police describing this as a very traumatic incident, but they say they're not looking for anyone else in connection with it. And neighbours have told me that when officers went door to door gathering information, they were referring to this as a serious domestic incident. Police were called here at 9:30 last night to reports of a disturbance. We know that specialist officers with negotiators came here and made contact with a male and female inside the house. Early this morning, the female left the house. She was injured and was taken to hospital, but when officers gained access to the property, they found that the adult male and 2 children were dead inside this house. Now, Leicestershire Police said this afternoon that because they had made contact with people inside the house, they've now referred all of this to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and of course they have appealed for anyone who thinks they may have information that could help the investigation to contact them.
Peter, thanks very much. Coming up on 5 News. How cuts in social care are leaving thousands of people without the help they need. And the Prime Minister wades into football's poppy row with a stern message for FIFA. We'll see you after the break. Hello and welcome back. You're watching 5 News. Cuts to social care in Britain mean that thousands of adults with disabilities aren't getting the support that they need. That warning comes from a leading charity which says people are left struggling with the basic things like washing, dressing or eating. Our chief correspondent Tessa Chapman has met one man who's worried he'll lose his independence because his care has been slashed.
Watch what you're doing. Lee Eidson lives at home with his parents. He has complex learning disabilities and social care for him means access to a day centre. He says going there is the one thing that gives him freedom.
I love it there because I've got people like myself there.
But Lee's 5 days a week are being cut to 3 and he's worried about too much time cooped up at home.
Boredom. And I'm feeling like I might get the Hulk back because I want the Hulk back.
What do you mean by the Hulk?
I mean, like my mum used to say we're violent and that, and I don't want to do that anymore.
A new report claims councils are facing a funding gap of £2.6 billion for adult social care. There are an estimated 2.7 million disabled people in Britain who need social care to live independently. The charity Leonard Cheshire Disabilities say more than 1 million may not be getting any support, and a further 800,000, like Lee, aren't getting enough.
Councils have fewer and fewer resources to provide support for more and more people. We have an ageing population and more people than ever before are living with a disability, so there's just not enough money in a system that's under huge pressure.
Lee's mum fears it's people who can't speak up for themselves who are losing out.
If they continue looking at the most vulnerable first, it's going to come down to they're not going to get anything again. And it's okay, well, we've got breath in our body, Lee will be safe. But what happens, I mean, we're in our 60s and 70s. We're not going to be around all the time. What's going to happen to the likes of Lee then?
His local council blamed the government, telling us the unfortunate reality is we simply cannot afford to offer the level of care we once did. With social care in a perilous state, Lee represents the human cost. Tessa Chapman, 5 News.
Theresa May has condemned FIFA for its ban on international footballers wearing poppies. England, Scotland and Wales players want to show their support for the appeal during their World Cup qualifiers on Armistice Day. The world's governing body won't allow them to, saying it's a political statement. Well, in the House of Commons today, the Prime Minister left MPs in no doubt what she thought.
I think the stance that's been taken by FIFA is utterly outrageous. Our football players want to recognise and respect those who have given their lives for our safety and security. I think it is absolutely right that they should be able to do so. I think it's for our football associations, but I think a clear message is going from this House. We want our players to be able to wear those poppies, and I have to say to FIFA that before they start telling us what to do, they jolly well ought to sort their own house out.
Well, let's speak to our political editor, Andy Bell, in Westminster now. Andy, very strong words there from Theresa May. Is there much she can do about it, though?
I don't think she's going to do very much about it beyond expressing her very strong opinion, as you heard there. Since we're talking about football, this was very much an open goal presented to the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions today. In fact, it was teed up by a Labour MP who asked the question. But as you heard her there, she is saying this is a matter for the football associations involved. And after Prime Minister's Questions, we were talking to the Prime Minister's official spokeswoman, and the spokeswoman made it plain that the Prime Minister had expressed a strong view, but she would not be taking the case directly to FIFA. So I think it's a question of strong opinions expressed by the Prime Minister today on this, but no direct action.
Andy, thank you. During World War II, hundreds of Allied aircrew who suffered severe burns in action were taken to a specialist hospital in Sussex. For many, the nature and extent of their injuries meant that years later they would not have survived. But here, they were in the care of a pioneering plastic surgeon. He was unafraid to experiment and through trial and error came to develop many of the techniques used on burns victims today. The results were often painful and required years of further treatment, but the men all now shared a common bond. And so their surgeon, this man in the middle at the piano, Sir Archibald Macindo, formed them into a club. He called it the Guinea Pig Club. Today, the Duke of Edinburgh joined surviving members for a special commemoration. Simon Vigar has more.
As with all World War II clubs, this one gets smaller by the year. But the Guinea Pig Club was pretty exclusive in the first place. Today they were joined at the National Memorial Arboretum by fellow veteran, the Duke of Edinburgh. He served in the Royal Navy. The guinea pigs were from the RAF and other Allied air forces. Their terrible burns took them to the Queen Victoria Hospital in East Grinstead and the care of the father of plastic surgery, Sir Archibald Macindo.
These guys had been brave. Many of them had been burned in battle. They'd had extensive treatment by Macindo, but they were all of high morale. They taught me to endure. That alters your personality, and for the better, I think.
Sir Archibald developed new techniques for skin grafts, but the physical side was just half the story. He also dealt with the psychological side and taught people outside the hospital how to treat the guinea pigs. Don't stare, just shake their hands.
I'm extraordinarily proud of his legacy. I think it is quite utterly remarkable that
We are now 56 years on from his death, that we can generate the sort of interest in, for instance, what's happening here today.
One of the guinea pigs said to the Duke the worst disability is deafness.
Deafness. Come join the club.
Join the club, replied the Duke. There was a bit of bother with the unveiling, but far worse things happen at sea and in the air. The guinea pigs have got their memorial. But Macindow's real legacy lives on every day in every hospital around the world. Simon Viger, 5 News.
Now, before we go, Matt's joined us to tell us what's coming up on 5 News tonight. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Sian. In an hour's time, we'll have more on our investigation uncovering Britain's illegal schools. I'll be speaking to a former pupil about her experiences at one. Also, would you let your car insurance company see your Facebook profile if it might save you money? That was the dilemma facing Admiral customers this morning when the insurance giant said it would use social media to analyse the personalities of their clients. Not sure I'd want them to see mine after a night out, Sian.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Matt. We'll see you later. That is it for now. Claire Nazir has got the weather for you next. I will see you again tomorrow at 5. Thanks for watching tonight. Goodbye for now.